Hey guys, Nicholai here, back at you with another response video to Ruslan KD. Now, it's not really Ruslan directly that I'm responding to, it's partially Defiant Baptist, so I'm going to be responding to both. But first, let's give this a listen to. I will be pausing throughout to give a little bit of commentary here and there. But for the most part, let's see what he has to say.
So, regarding Christian nationalism, I think it would depend on the definition. I think a lot of folks are upset about Christian nationalism this, Christian nationalism that. Something that I'm more concerned about than Christian nationalism, believe it or not, is actually Christian nihilism. I think Christian nihilism and Christians punting their life, Christians checking out from the market, Christians checking out from the institutions, Christians checking out from the arts, to me, is way more concerning than whatever it is that people are upset about regarding Christian nationalism. Again, based on how we define it. When I hear Doug Wilson define it, I go,
I'm going to respectfully disagree with KD. Ruslan, I have a problem with your terminology of Christian nihilism. Checking out from the institutions, checking out from the arts and things of that nature. I think the institutions, you could maybe argue, yes, Christians have ceded their ground. They have basically abandoned fighting for their moral positions in favor of this sort of like pseudo-libertarian-esque live and let live mindset. And I think that's a abhorrent issue and it's massively a problem. However, with the arts, Christian art has been around forever, and part of the reason it hasn't really ever made a meaningful impact is because, frankly, it's kind of lame. A lot of Christian art is just not that great in quality. And a lot of it is super kind of focused in on this kind of generic, like Jesus stuff. And people don't want that. Like when people want to go to church, they want to get away from the pop music, from the rap music, from all this other stuff. Church is supposed to be a removal of that, which is part of the reason why I'm Orthodox. I mean, it's a very small part, but it's part of the reason I believe Orthodoxy is true, obviously. But I don't think it's as much about Christians abandoning the arts. It's that Christians abandoned their uh, ontology. They've abandoned their style of art, the chanting, the icons, the architecture, the being the center of life in the day-to-day life of a church. Instead, we have gymnasium churches, you know, and those don't inspire people to greatness. They don't inspire people to preserving their culture. It doesn't inspire people into a nationalistic idea of we are a Christian nation. When I go down the street and see Cornerstone Church and it's this big boxy building that looks like it could just be a warehouse for glass, like a glass shop or a warehouse for bricks or timber, yeah, that doesn't inspire a whole lot of like fervor in people, right? This is where the Catholics and uh, Orthodox, but also to a degree Catholics and even Anglicans, though that's quickly dying off, get this right. The problem is theologically, the Catholics and the Anglicans have a lot of issues, so that can't be helped. Now, let's continue to listen.
it doesn't sound so bad. When I hear this idea of a violent uprising and a Christian prince, I go, I'm not a big fan of that, right? So,
well, I don't think really very many people at all are calling for that. I haven't seen that. And the few people that I do are kind of people laugh about it. Christians aren't called necessarily to violent uprising, but we are called to defend our neighbors and defend ourselves when necessary. And when a government becomes tyrannical to the point where they're trying to stop us from being able to worship, I think it's every Christian's duty to oppose that in whatever way they can. Does that mean using violent terroristic tactics? Not necessarily. That being said, I'm a monarchist, so I mean, you're not going to see me complain too much about Christian nationalists.
It would depend on what we're talking about. Now, I think what Mike Winger's getting at is the folks who wave the banner of Christian nationalism are, one, kind of sloppy in defining it, and two, just don't have good PR around it. Again, Doug Wilson, I thought, did a great job. The other concern is that when we're waving the flag of Christian nationalism is that other weird stuff starts getting backdoored, right? So we're seeing stuff like, hey, women shouldn't vote. It's like, well, man, if they pay taxes and they're individual American citizens, why should they not?
Well, because there's two problems with that. Traditionally, not even most men voted. It was a very select few of people that were allowed to vote, and they had to meet very specific criteria. Women simply just didn't meet that. Frankly, I don't think that anyone who doesn't meet the criteria to vote probably shouldn't be really paying taxes in the sense that they get to decide any major decisions. Um, I think it's really that simple. That being said, I would agree with Ruslan that that's just not a tenable position right now. You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle right now. Um, this is a process that will take 50 plus years before even I would say a plurality of women decide to stay home, which would be like 30%. If we can get to 30%, I think there'd be a stronger and stronger and stronger case for that, and I think there'd be more and more public support for that. But you have to rebuild the institutions first because women need an institution. Traditionally, women would go to church and they would organize there and they would organize politically to help influence their local lawmakers in a healthy way through local community activism. We have to have the churches as the bedrock. The problem is the churches have completely ceded any and all ground on local and national institutions. And so there's nowhere for women to express grievances, to have their voices heard. Women still need their voices heard on the national stage. It just needs to be done in a different way than voting. Frankly, women don't have to be drafted. They don't deserve the vote. I mean, it's really that simple. Um, if they can vote to send our young men to war, uh, then I'm sorry, if they don't get sent to war as well, they just don't get to vote. Now, that's a utilitarian argument. That's kind of a more materialist argument. I would go with a more Christian argument, which is men are the head of the households, men are the head of the nations, men are called to lead, and women are not. It's that simple.
Vote. Like that seems weird. Some of the other stuff, and I'm not saying this is Doug Wilson, but I have seen other folks that are kind of in similar streams that start backdoing some overt racism, right? Some overt views that I would say are
I haven't really seen too much of that. There's always a little strain of that. Those are like some of the gripers and things like that. But I mean, it's not nearly as big as he's suggesting. And again, the people that seize on those super small niche minority voices are people that don't like Christian nationalism, even the Doug Wilson kind that you're advocating for, Ruslan. So that it's just a way for them to push back on this idea without actually ever meaningfully addressing the core arguments being made.
incongruent with believing that all people are created in the image of God. Women and men, black people, white people, native people, Spanish people, Asian people, everyone's created in the image of God. And I have seen some stuff that kind of gets backdoored with pretty weird and racial undertones, generally conflating culture with race, right? So you look at some specific segments of culture and then you take those.
And I would have very similar criticisms for some of the people that do that as well. I believe I'm not ignorant. I believe that there is a component to intelligence and other aspects, and certain sins express themselves in different cultures uniquely. There is evidence of that. There's scriptural evidence for that as well. That being said, I would say the genetic quote unquote component of these things is mostly it's about 60% genetic, but people like always like get all hung up about that so you think most of what makes up a person is genetic. Well, yeah, but 40% is pretty significant. That's going from, let's say someone is genetically predisposed to being 80 IQ because of their parents, but they're raised in a good household. They're taught from a young age to value certain things. They grow up in a community that's good. They get good nutrition and everything else that would influence that. And let's say they do everything to the maximum and add a 40% on top of their IQ, right? 40%. That's a lot. Okay. you're adding 20, at least 20, right? Well, closer to like 25, 30. You're almost 25, 30%, 30 IQ points higher from 80. So let's say you're at 80, that's your bare, and that's pretty low. Most people are not going to be 80, but let's just say 80, and you're like, okay, well, let's add 40% of 80 on top of what they already are, right? Well, now suddenly that person is close to 100, 110. That's pretty average, and that's pretty good. You can have a very good quality of life, and you can contribute majorly to society that way. So I would say people that kind of pearl clutch about that, even if you were to say it's 70-30, 30% swing in IQ is a huge swing. It's like that's huge. That's still going to get you to that 100 mark or close to that 100 mark. And also IQ is not a perfect predictor of a lot of things. Okay, so we'll be fair with that as well. But I don't want to get bogged down in the IQ question. My point is that I actually broadly agree with Ruslan that people are too hyper focused on race, and that my whole argument there was just to tell the people that are very, very focused in on race that the question is not whether or not we can solve the genetic component. That's irrelevant. And even bringing that up, you're just bringing up a point that is like we can't do anything about. You're not going to fix that. The only way to fix that is to instill a cultural norms and fix the food issue, nutrition issue, the schooling and everything else. You fix all those underlying cultural issues. Then once we kind of reach that point where we're getting people to on average consistently hit it out of the park, then you can address those broader discussions, right? But it does nothing for society to focus in on something that's not solvable. You can't solve a genetic problem, right? It's ridiculous. So, anyways, we'll continue.
Segments that are deplorable and unhelpful, like crime within specifically condensed urban areas, specifically like black on black crime, for example. And then you parse it out and you start making absolute statements on all black culture, not understanding that less than 1% of black men do all the committing of murders, usually against other black men. That is something that I find alarming, but it's not unanimous across every single person that's waving this Christian nationalist flag, right? I don't think like that's something that Josh Howerton holds to. I don't think that's something that Doug Wilson holds to, as far as I know. So I think you do see some of that kind of getting backdoored within this conversation. I don't think that's helpful. And so Christian nationalism, it's worth having. It's worth having. It's worth defining. I'm Armenian, ethnically Armenian. If you go to Armenia, they would say that they are a Christian nation, that their faith influences their politics. If you go to Ethiopia, they say they're the first Christian nation. Are they Christian nationalists? Again, how would you define Christian nationalism, right? How would you define?
And I think that's fair. I think the bigger problem is that the reason there's so much disagreement about what is Christian nationalism in the context of America is that America's foundational like ethos is a rejection of a sort of Christian ethos. Not in the sense that it rejects like Christianity outright, but that the secular aspects of it means that there's very little way in which you can influence Christian nationalism any one way, because which denomination, which theology, which framework are you going to believe? Because, for example, Orthodox Christian is going to say, frankly, we're a monarchist, and so we want to take principles of monarchism, not necessarily monarchism altogether, but we want to take the principles of monarchism and apply them to our government. We're gonna want a very hierarchical structure, right? Whereas you might look at an independent fundamentalist Baptist and they're saying we want Christian nationalism, they're going to be like, well, anybody that does blasphemy from our perspective is going to be ousted. Well, there goes the Catholics and the Orthodox, right? So I think that's a big problem too that you're just ignoring. You can't have that in America. And I think a lot of the Christian nationalists are ignoring that as well. I'm not saying Ruslan himself is. I just think Ruslan doesn't notice this. Maybe he's not noticing this, but I think it's really important thing to focus in on. That Christian nationalism is a big problem because there's no way to define it uh, consistently amongst those people. Doug Wilson, he would absolutely uh, try and impose his theological framework on the rest of us Christians that don't agree with his theological framework, right? That's a problem. So I agree, but with caveats.
Now, for me, listen, for me, I have no problem with saying, hey, the termination of unborn babies should be outright outlawed. Okay, no problem with that. I have no problem with saying that, hey, what people are calling this union that is not a one man, one woman marriage, I don't think that's a real marriage, right? I have no problem with saying these things. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, we want our Christian values and morals to legislate our morality. And people go, well, you can't legislate your morals. Someone's morals are getting legislated. And by the way, all the people who have an issue with unborn babies being deleted tend to not have any issues with folks not being able to drink and drive, or folks not being having seatbelt laws, right? The same arguments that are railed against pro-lifers who say, hey, we think the termination of unborn babies is evil. Those same arguments were literally the arguments that people were making in the 80s when drunk driving laws came out and seatbelt laws came out. The same arguments. It's my body, it's my choice, it's my car, I can do what I want with it. And yeah, we collectively said no. No, 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 no. Why? Because your body on the road, intoxicated, impacts other people. And I think that folks who buy into this, it's just a clump of cells, are impacting not just themselves, depending on how you define Christian nationalism. But
Yeah. So Defiant Baptist took issue with this, saying Ruslan decided to chime in on Mike Winger's ongoing struggle session with Christian nationalism. At the end of the video, offered his own perspective. Between two merch ads. Okay, who cares? Who cares? He has a show. He wants to fund his show. Essentially, Ruslan is totally cool with Christian nationalism, provided it's correctly defined with the definition that he defines as good, without anything in the definition that he defines as bad. Well, no, definitions typically are positive in orientation. A definition is typically saying what it is, not necessarily what it's not. It's not apophatic in nature. Most definitions are not apophatic in nature. I know from an Orthodox perspective, it's a little hard for us because a lot of our theology is apophatic, particularly when it comes to who God is, what God is, how God operates. Is typically we say, well, this is what God isn't, right? We typically operate in that sphere, but that's like a theological sphere. When it comes to Christian nationalism, I don't think there's any problem with positively defining it and then as time goes on saying, well, that can't be a part of it because of this principle. I think you have to start with a positive definition. So, Defiant Baptist, I didn't find your I didn't find you all that convincing in your criticism of Ruslan. I think Ruslan offered a okay thing with some caveats. So, Ruslan, God bless you, brother. I know that you are not Orthodox. I pray that you do become Orthodox, obviously, but I have no problem with you. I think that your videos, for the most part, are interesting, and I'll continue to consume them when they are relevant to me. As for Defiant Baptist, what did you offer here? You proceeded not to offer anything, so just criticism, which isn't all that useful. So, God bless. Have a wonderful day, guys.